Welcome to Elixir Mix, your weekly Elixir podcast, talking with members of the community. My name is Mark Erickson, and on our panel today, we have Josh Adams.
Hey, everybody.
And Eric Oestrich.
Howdy.
And today we are going to be interviewing Eric because as it is from time to time, we want to catch up with people who are doing things in the open source Elixir area community. And even though he's a panelist and on our podcast, normally we don't get to talk about what he's doing. So we want to take a little bit of time today and just kind of get caught up on what he's been working on. And so, Eric, maybe you could first give us a little bit of background on what you do outside of this podcast.
Sure. So I guess we'll start with, so I work at SmartLogic. We're a web and mobile consultancy. So I do a lot of Elixir development there, and most recently deployment and all that fun stuff. And outside of work, I would work on a project called Grapevine. It's a mud community site. You can think of it like Steam, but for text games, more specifically multiplayer text games. So it's got like a listing. You can find new games. You can play games on the site. There's all kinds of cool features that I'm sure we'll get into and how that works coming shortly.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DevChat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DevChat at Sentry.io.
So in case people aren't familiar with, like we've had you on the podcast long time ago, and you also came on as a guest to our Utah Elixir meetup, doing a remote session. And you're talking about your game ExVenture, which is a online MUD. And so maybe you could just kind of give a brief description of what a MUD is in case people aren't familiar with that term.
Yeah, so a MUD is a multi-user dungeon. So dungeon in this case is a specific program called Dungeon from like 1978. That was a text adventure that you just explored a dungeon, right? So this was a multi-user version of that. So it's a game where you connect via telnet historically, and still there's some new things happening where you can play through your web browser, so that uses WebSockets and all that, and like modern technology. So it's you connect to the game, you just get some, like, you'll get a welcome prompt, and then you just start typing, right? You log in through a telnet session and you just kind of get text, and it describes the world you're in. You can see it's World of Warcraft, EverQuest, except it's text-based only. Like, these came before any of the graphical versions. Some of the early MMOs were actually called graphical MUDs, which is kind of interesting. So you can see, like, this was the foundation for kind of all multiplayer, like, RPG things. So yeah, so it's an RPG. So you have a character, you can role play as that character. Some of them you don't, like, it's just kind of hack and slash. You just wander around and just be a murder hobo, like D&D typical sessions. So yeah, it's I don't know, kind of any kind of typical RPG. You can find all kinds of variations from like hack and slash to there's a style called Mush that is like almost exclusively just like typing out paragraphs of text, like kind of detailing what your character is doing and like writing a collaborative book of sorts. So like there's that style. There's other styles that are kind of anywhere in between. Yeah.
That's cool. So then with ExVenture, I know that has spawned out a number of other projects, and one of those was Grapevine. And so one of the things we want to talk about today was Grapevine specifically, and just kind of getting an update on what you're doing. I know you've been having some Hacktoberfest contributions, which it will be over by the time this podcast goes live. But yeah, so we just love to hear a little bit more about kind of Grapevine, the architecture of it. And one of the things I think is relevant, even if someone out there is listening to this and they are like, well, I don't want to make a MUD. I don't necessarily want to play a MUD. What's still very applicable is that this is open source and it is like a production system. It is in use in production with users. So it gives you an opportunity to explore it, to see how it's working. So we can talk about some of the features, some of the different things people might find in there. And then also just kind of see that the relevance is still there. So why don't you start with kind of like you said, you still live stream occasionally. So why don't you give people a little introduction to what they might see there?
Yeah, so I do a live stream over on, we have a Twitch, it's Twitch TV, SmartLogic TV. So that's our SmartLogic live stream on Mondays at noon, roughly a few times a month. I don't know. It's kind of whenever we have a specific topic. So the last few weeks I've been doing like coding a rate limiter. So the Grapevine has a cross-game chat as part of it. And so I wanted to make sure that like you can't register a game, connect to it, like, and then just like spam the crap out of of like a channel, right? So this now, so you, like the live streams, and these are on YouTube as well, so you can watch the archives of it. So you can watch me, like it's all open source, so I'm not afraid of showing stuff, right? So it's just starting from like an idea, and I typically don't plan out much like beforehand, so you'll get to watch all the fumbles and and like whatever you would do normally in development, and just kind of see where things go and whatnot.
So is that I was curious about that, like the idea of how much preparation goes into one of these ahead of time, and just like, is that embarrassing? We're like, crap, I'm not sure what to do here, and then are you just kind of like exploring, like, well, let me think, I could do this, I could do that, just talking it through? What's that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been too bad in terms of like flubs or whatever. Like I think it's important to show that like everyone's human, right? So like people make mistakes, so it hasn't been too embarrassing, I think, to make them in front of people. So I think that's always good to see. And I typically do have I spend, I don't know, the half an hour to 15 minutes beforehand kind of thinking of what I want to do and like how it will go. So I have a pretty general idea of where things will trend for that hour. So it's not like I'm just starting it up and like going completely blind. But yeah, like I haven't like pre-done everything beforehand, I guess is the big thing. So I get to show like a lot of it's TDD stuff. So like I'll start with like, all right, I want to do a rate limiter. Let's write a test that fails and see where that goes and whatnot.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to watch that.
Cool. Yeah. I was actually concerned. We like track our metrics a bit, and like I started doing TDD, and it was like mostly a terminal that one time, and it was like lower viewership. So I was like, oh. So it's good to hear that people do want to see TDD in action.
So maybe now would be a good time to talk about some of the features that people would find in Grapevine, one of which I know it's multi-node. So maybe we could just kind of start talking there. Like, what are some of the things that, I know when people come to Elixir, after they get over the syntax hurdle of just figuring out how do I even code and read Elixir, once they get past that, then a lot of people are like, I want to understand OTP. Like what kinds of OTP style concepts might they find in Grapevine?
I guess all the big ones, right? So we have multi-node. I use ETS fairly heavily. There's I've got some globally named gen servers, which is sort of an issue, but it works, so whatever. So I guess I'll start with like how the multi-node is set up, right? So I have it's multi-node, but it's single physical node, I guess. So I have a single VPS that runs two separate Erlang nodes. One is the main web server, which contains the website and the WebSocket. And the second node is just for telnet connections. So the main reason I wanted to pull that off is that I could redeploy the website without killing people's game sessions, because telnet is not stateful, right? So you can't reconnect. So as soon as it drops, if the game doesn't support you signing into your character again and picking up where you left off, then you're sorry, can't help you.
But you're saying then that because the web side, the Phoenix side, does have the ability then to redeploy that node, it drops the connections, and because of their JavaScript on their client side in the browser, it's like reconnecting back up to their same session, so they're not losing their connection, right?
Yeah, so they're only losing the WebSocket to me. So when I deploy, anyone who's connected will see a big red system message that says like, system, we are redeploying. You will lose connection for a few seconds, but you're like, don't worry, nothing's going away otherwise. So that's kind of some magic OTP stuff going on. And
I badly want that to be the actual verbatim text of the message, by the way.
I can tell you what the verbatim text is.
Oh,
if you're curious. Okay, so it's not so fun. It just says it's restarting, but
so poor request.
Yes. Yeah, so your connection to the website drops because the Phoenix layer dropped, but because it's using just distribution, the telnet node has its own process that's actually connected to the game server that will keep trying to send messages to a dead PID, and it just kind of falls into the void because it's just a cast, so who cares? The server will restart and pop back up, and your session will reconnect because Phoenix.js is just trying to like reconnect, and we'll eventually get it. And when it reconnects, it joins the session. It sees that the session already exists, so it tries to like create or find one that exists already. It joins up, it takes over that process, and then just picks up as if nothing happened. You get kind of spammed with like the back history of like the last 10 lines, and it just keeps going, which is really cool to see in action. If you want to see what it looks like without me actually doing a deploy, like if you're sitting at home and want to see this, you can start playing any game that has the web client enabled and then just refresh the page. The basic concepts are all the same. You'll lose your WebSocket connection, but then you'll immediately get a new one because you've reloaded the page. You'll get the last 10 lines and just keep going as if nothing happened.
That is cool. I love the resilience that we can have with Elixir, and especially with Phoenix channels and everything that's already built in and available to us. So how are you deploying this? You mentioned it's a VPS, like DigitalOcean or something, presumably. But like, so how is it you're actually deploying this?
Yeah, so it's on DigitalOcean. I went and sprang for the dedicated cores instance. So it's got 2 dedicated cores. So it was like let's have some fun. I've got Erlang. I can use these cores to their fullest, right? So it's got 2 dedicated cores. Totally does not need it, but it's fun. So whatever. And then the rest of it, I went pretty old school. Well, it's like half new, half old. So I use Docker to build the release, which we'll probably talk about in a bit. So once I get a release out of it, I just have the tarball of it's Elixir 1.9 releases. So I get that out of it. And then I have a bash script that just SCPs it up. And I have like the rest of that command is a bunch of SSH with like single commands. So it stops the systemd service. First it tells everything that it's about to restart. So that tells the web client, puts that message in. All of the people connected to the game chat will get an event that says, hey, this is about to go down. Maybe wait 15 seconds before you come back or whatever. And then I stop the service, migrate, start the service. So if you happen to be on Grapevine, and I'm deploying, you might see it just says Grapevine's down. So it's not using any load balancer or anything like that. That's primarily because that costs money, and I'm willing to splurge on a fun single VPC or VPS rather, but not multiple and a load balancer and like all the cool stuff that makes this like extra resilient and have no downtime without doing like hot code upgrades.
Elixir Casts create screencasts that cover a wide range of Elixir and Phoenix topics. Each episode tackles a specific problem or explores a new library, demystifying it in a language that's easy to understand. Whether you are just starting with Elixir or are using it professionally with 100 plus episodes, there's something for you. Go check them out at elixircasts.io.
So it's pretty low tech, I guess, that way, as far as that's concerned. So you'll see it's like 3 to 5 seconds of downtime whenever I deploy, mostly because it has to tear when you stop the application through systemd, and I think just in general, because it just does like it does like a control, whatever the kill signal is that doesn't terminate it. And then Erlang will rewind all of your supervision tree, and that takes a little bit to tear down. So there's kind of that, and then migrating has to start up a new instance and do its migration. Most of the time it doesn't do anything. So I guess I could make my bash script be smarter and only do it when I would need to. And then starting takes a little bit as it replays the reverse way, the correct way, the supervision tree. So yeah, there's a little bit of downtime. I could architect it so it doesn't have that, but this is a side project, so I'll deal with it. And then that goes for the telnet node as well. I have a different set of bash scripts, mostly copy pasted, but going to a different folder. And yeah, that uses Docker and Elixir 1.9, generates a release, pushes it up, and then starts it. I use libcluster to join them using the EPMD strategy. So it just knows that there's a grapevine at localhost and a telnet at localhost. And the one specific weirdness that I had to do, I don't know if I actually need to do it or not, but if you have two Erlang nodes on the same host, they will both try and start EPMD by themselves. Like, that's just kind of an automatic thing when it starts. So I had a really weird issue that whichever one started first, the second one could connect to it. But if you restarted the first one, that couldn't connect to the second one. So you could only deploy in a weird, I don't know, it was really strange until I just copied EPMD, the binary, out of the release, put it in like the home folder, and made a systemd service start it. And then all of my other ones was just like, I need that thing to start. So running it separately fixed all of the issues. I have a blog post about that if anyone's curious. Yeah, that was the only audit for deployment of local multi-nodes, I guess.
That's also just generally a thing. I did a project with some Gentoo folks, and they were very unhappy until they realized they could run EPMD as a separate unit that's dependent on, not that it was systemd, but yeah, because having kind of two processes maybe sometimes fall under a unit is weird.
Yeah, it was not obvious that this was the thing you should do either. Since pretty much everything we've done so far, if we do multi-node, it's been on a separate like VM, so that's just not been an issue. So yeah, if you're running into this, the blog post is linked, so hopefully this will save some trouble.
I remember when I was first kind of exploring and playing with EPMD and trying to see what I could do. Part of that was seeing that I included the link to it in the show notes. It's the official Erlang documentation for it. And it has the EPMD process. It's an application, a system application. I believe it's written in C. It has a bunch of flags and options that you can say, bind to this port. So you can have multiples running on the same server with different ports and different things like that. And you can send messages to it to say kill or stop and things like that. So I think it's interesting. One of the things I think I heard you say is that you're using Docker to build your release, but then you're deploying not using Docker. You're just kind of taking what was built of the release out of Docker and then using that to deploy. So I'm just curious as to, maybe you could talk for a moment about like your choice to not use Docker on the server and just, kind of your background there, your thinking.
Yeah. So I guess the legacy of my deployment has been, my desktop is Linux, my server is Linux. So I didn't have to, so originally I just had a release script that generated it like on my desktop outside of everything. And then I would deploy that. That worked great until Arch updated to OpenSSL like 1.3, and my server had 1.2, and that just completely blew up. So I went with Docker release to have it build inside of Ubuntu so that it was the same like library setup as well as architecture going forward. This, I guess, would also let me build on my laptop, which is a Mac. Don't ever do that because I've got a desktop that's more powerful, so I'll just use that. So yeah, I guess I did not go with Docker on the server because it was already set up to be native, I guess if we call it native deployment. So it's just easier to keep with that. And Kubernetes and all that was just a little more than I was willing to invest time-wise, I spent a week, and Grapevine actually does work inside of Kubernetes. I have a branch that's probably woefully out of date at this point, but it does work. But I've just never wanted to spin up the cluster because that'll go past my like $40 budget. So yeah, that was primarily the reason. So I guess I can go into a bit more about what that Docker file actually does.
Well, one of the things I just wanted to make sure that you, dear listener, kind of catch here is that, because I know in our Utah Elixir meetup, we've been talking about, and our upcoming message or presentation is going to be about deployment. So I know deployment is one of those big questions that people have about, I've written something and I want to actually put it somewhere other than my own computer. And so I just wanted people to make sure they catch that what you're talking about here is like, there's lots of different ways to deploy. You don't have to deploy to Kubernetes. You don't have to, you don't have to deploy using the Docker container. There's lots of different ways. You don't even have to build a release to deploy. So just want to make sure that, there are some best practices when you're talking about enterprise and this is my business, and there's best practices you might want to follow there. But when you just want to get something up and going, you don't need to do all that. And so,
and yeah, so that's all super true, and it's an awesome thing about Erlang. Also, once you do sort of start going down the release path, the tooling is just incredibly robust. I mean, it's very mature. So I used to be, like way back in the day, was very concerned about deploying, and it's actually a really, really good story in Erlang.
Yeah, I actually started a different side project last night, and I got it set up so you could log in and just have a site. And I was like, all right, I need to keep this momentum, get this thing deployed. And within about, an hour, I had it running remotely. Granted, I have experience doing, I pretty much copy pasted what Grapevine does. So it's copied the release Docker file, copied the SCP scripts, the release scripts, all that. Most of that is public as well. If you want to, it's on the Grapevine if you want to steal for yourself. And then for the server itself, all you have to do is that one is a $5 instance. I installed Postgres, Nginx, and Certbot. And the rest is you don't need anything else. Maybe ImageMagick if you're doing photo stuff. And you just put the tarball on the server, untar it, make a service that points at it, and you're good to go. You're done, and it's running. So it's super easy now to get something going. Maybe it's not your final production system, but it's just something in the wild, and it's working, which is the most important part if this is a hobby project or whatever. So yeah. So I in the show notes there's a link to Hello Production, which is a blog post about specifically getting a minimalist version of a new system into production as soon as possible. Is how they describe it, just because it gives you lots of fun benefits, which they lay out in the nice blog post. Okay, so I have a question unrelated to deployment, which is what are the more interesting clients that you've seen use Grapevine? Is it all just normal people doing what I would consider normal mud, or are there people using it for things unanticipated? So far it's just been expected stuff. A lot of it is, so I guess the web chat stuff. So a bit of background or just definition of what that is. So Grapevine has a WebSocket protocol that is set up so that you can connect as your game server, and locally people will chat, and then that just gets pushed up to Grapevine and then rebroadcast out to anyone else on that channel, right? There's docs, you can kind of see what's going on there. So far no one has done anything fancy. It's the whole point of it is to be a way to bring a lot of empty games together, so that if one person is signed on, the odds that someone else is signed on somewhere else is higher, and that they can chat, and that they're have someone to talk to, and it's not just a big empty world. So that's the goal of it. So that said, someone last night was actually asking about if they could use Grapevine as effectively RabbitMQ or Kafka.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was wondering what the most flagrant abuse of it you've seen is, or that you can imagine. That's a fun one too.
Josh, was that you asking that question?
No, but when I was reading through the API docs, I thought, I wonder how long it takes till somebody builds a smart fridge that uses something like this.
So at least right now, I actually just implemented rate limiting. So you could send 2 messages a second if that's good enough for your Kafka. Maybe this will work for you. I don't know. And then it'll actually disconnect you if you try to go too fast. But it's also like meant to be a chat. So someone's supposed to be watching this, right? And like you don't want the chat to go whoosh and like scroll right past as someone's just spamming stuff. But
you're wanting it to be human interactive, not like a bot that's just like spamming stuff.
Yeah. So I did start brainstorming when this person was asking about that, because he was like, it would be really cool to use like Grapevine as my interconnect. So he was describing, he's got like game servers and then like back-end game servers and front-end game servers. So you would connect to the front-end game server, which is then like, that is then like how you get into the world. So what he wanted was a Grapevine in between those things. So that you could do like, the world is pushing out, the game servers are pushing out like world state stuff to the front ends. And like, if anyone wanted to hook into that, then they could just subscribe to the Grapevine channel and just like, poof, they're part of the world now too. So like, it's got like a cool idea behind it. But I was like, instead of like making something hacky that works with like text chat, I would rather just make like an event system that does the thing that we want.
And then you're like, have you thought of Elixir?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe is doing C# stuff. So the processes are separate Windows processes, a little bit heavier.
Yep.
One of my favorite communities to get involved with these days is the Angular community. There are so many great people there. We've had a lot of them on Adventures in Angular over the last several years. And I really wanted to just highlight people and give you a chance to get to know the flavor and the feel of being around some of these awesome people. We've talked to people on the Angular core team. We've talked to people who have organized the conferences. We've talked to some of the co-hosts that I've had on Adventures in Angular. Nowadays, Aaron Frost is running the show and he's doing the same thing. Typically, he's been doing it at conferences lately, which is a lot of fun. But you get to hear what these people are about and why they care and how they get involved with other people in the Angular community. So if you're looking for that connection in the Angular community and a way to really understand the people who are involved in the Angular community, then go check out My Angular Story. You can find it at myangularstory.com.
All right. So statistics. So I know you have a metrics section for all the stuff you do around this, I think, but I saw it in Grapevine. What are I know that you gather sort of basic node, I think you use the process collector, so node information. What are some sort of game level metrics that you're gathering? And I assume you're pushing those up with Prometheus because I saw a second port open.
Yeah, so the Prometheus stuff, okay, so I have the standard Prometheus X or URL or whatever the thing is, just dump out normal stats. And then I have a bunch of telemetry events to capture, like someone just registered a game, someone just signed up, all the channel stuff is instrumented. So I have a graph or a chart that I can look at to like see activity. Unfortunately, it's been a flat line, so I haven't actually been looking at it. So yeah, I also have, I previously had some alerting set up for like someone registers a game, that went through Alert Manager. But then I wanted something more real time, so I've added in like kind of an internal alerting stuff, so that I'll get like a custom email type of thing. So you can see that. And then I also have some other internal stats for games. So once an hour, I will go ahead and scrape someone's telnet connection. There's a protocol called MSSP, which is MUD Server Stats Protocol, that says how many players are connected in the telnet stream. So I go ahead and actually save that as a row in Postgres. I don't know how to hook that directly into Prometheus, so I just went with doing my own thing. And then you can, if you like, browse to a game. I guess I'll link one that has a nice chart. But so you can see I put out some pretty, and I think they're fancy charts where it's like the last 48 hours of players. So you can see the people who have connected each hour, and then the last week of players, but it's bundled into 4 hours. And you can see the min, max, and average of those. So you can kind of see like trending when people are playing. And then the time of day for the last week. So like at 9 a.m. for the last week, this game has had 29 average players. So you can kind of see when it's kind of fun. You can like watch when work happens for most of these things. So it'll like dip from like 9 to like 5 p.m. And then like spike up afterwards.
Funny. And what are you using to gather the data to produce the charts?
So that is it's just storing a record in Postgres. So there's just I don't know. It's just a new table that's like
that's the one that you okay.
Yep. Yeah. So nothing fancy there. I don't know. I know Prometheus has some warnings around inserting stuff that is unbounded. So that's primarily why I've avoided it, because I don't know how many games there will be. So I don't necessarily want to start outputting stats to it as like a counter or whatever, because it'll just get scraped along with everything else. And I'll have a 15-second resolution on an hourly updated thing. I guess it probably does something fancy if nothing changes, but yeah, so it's possibly unbounded. So that could be an issue. The reason that's an issue is that each time record series, whatever you do, so like each label you have, so this would be like a different label for the game ID, like the current count or whatever. Each label you have creates a different time series, which then like explodes the amount of data it has to store. So that was primarily why I went with storing it locally in just Postgres. And I mean, even I have some tens of thousands to a low hundreds of thousands of events, and Postgres is still like super snappy. So like I'm a bit too worried.
Yeah. So I did want to mention, in case anyone else out there is thinking about using telemetry, because one of our recent interviews was talking about telemetry with Eric, who is the author of the Beam telemetry project. And one of the things that I think is beneficial is, like, when I met Eric at a Elixir Conf last year, it was looking at his project, his open source project, where I saw how to do Prometheus metrics. And just looking at the updated version in Grapevine, it's using the Beam telemetry project and attaching to the event notifications. And so if anyone wants to see how can I do that for my own project, I would definitely direct you to check that out. Drop a link to the location in the source tree. It's under the metrics, where you can just kind of see how things get attached, and then you can search the code for where those events get kind of fired. But something like that is super helpful if you're wanting to instrument your own application and just try and figure out, like, how do I do this? What does it actually look like when it's set up? So +1 for that.
All right, so I think we've covered all of the ground that there is to cover. Do we want to move on to picks? All right, I'll go first. I have 2 picks. The first is the Radiohead Glastonbury Festival. So it's just this YouTube video. It's an hour and a half concert that Radiohead did, and it's amazing, and I just enjoyed it. So let me copy that. And then the other is just generically, all 3 of us use Linux on the desktop, and it's really good. And I wanted to give it a shout out because it turns out that Linux is a fantastic operating system, and I think a lot of people still think of it as how it was in 2000 or so. Consequently, there's this nice article, Apple of 2019 is Linux of 2000, with such gems as, let me grab so like in a Linux laptop of 2000, you couldn't get with more than 2 USB ports, and also Apple laptops of 2019. Anyway, so those are my picks.
Nice. So my pick today is, so there's a web comic called The Oatmeal, and he had a section on running. So I know a lot of people I've run into in the tech community enjoy running as a form of exercise, hobby, stress reliever, whatever it is. And this comic I just found quite hilarious. It's like a 6-part thing. He talks about training for marathons and running, but it's done in a totally humorous way. Like, if you're a runner, people think you're healthy in everything, and that's not the case. And it's like, oh my gosh, they have my favorite tofu here. It's like, that's not how it is. So his motivation for running is so he can eat whatever he wants. And so it's a great comic. So if you're into running, I'd encourage you to check that out. Eric.
All right, so I'll do a technical and then a non-technical one. So my GitHub is full of I don't know, different projects I've started, if you want to check that out. But specifically, I'll pull out something called Squabble. So this was the Raft implementation that only deals with leader selection. So you can have this is what ExVenture uses to pick a world leader to boot the world. So that's kind of cool. If nothing else, to just check out and like see what's going on there. And then my second one, I've been, just kind of so like going with the running thing, just doing something that's non-technical. I've been playing the violin for the last, 5 or so years. So I started as an adult, and it's been kind of cool to like slowly work through that and like stretch different parts of your brain that aren't like technical things and whatnot. And I just started the cello more recently, and just kind of, I don't know, it's cool to do something that's non-tech, and you get as a bonus, you get to listen to cool classical music, right?
Awesome. Well, Eric, thanks for taking some time to give us an update on what you've been working on. And if people would like to follow you or connect with you online, where should they go to do that?
So you can go to, I'm on Twitter at Eric Oestrich. Grapevine is at grapevine.house. That's the German spelling. So that's HAUS. And that has a contact me there and all that fun stuff. And then my GitHub is Oestrich. So that's how you can find all the source of this.
All right. We will have the links to those in the show notes. Check those out. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next week on Elixir Mix.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHE